Walk the dogs, school drop-off, meetings from 10 to 3, take kids to soccer, then no time left for a jog.
When everyone else is relying on you, it's easy to put your needs last. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist online, so you can show up for yourself the way you do for others. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Sox Machine Live. I'm your host, Josh Nelson. I'll be joined momentarily by Jim Margulis, the managing editor of SoxMachine.com, as we bring you a new episode on May 18th, 2023, as the Chicago White Sox just wrap up a series win against the Cleveland Guardians. As the White Sox won 2 out of 3, they won the first 2 games. They lost the third game by a score of 3-1. As Jim joins me here on the live stream on youtube.com/SoxMachine. And for those that are also watching on SoxMachine.com or watching on Twitter at SoxMachine, or following me on Twitter at SoxMachine_Josh, or for those that are listening to the audio version of this episode afterwards onto the podcast feed. And I think in this particular series, Jim, for the Chicago White Sox, winning 2 out of 3 against the Cleveland Guardians is a good result. Sure, they could have swept, maybe should have swept, with Dylan Cease on the mound in Game 3 and Cleveland's offense not being very good. But I think what we saw in this series, especially in the first 2 games, might be a path for this team to bounce back, and it is very simple. Ball go far, team go far, because what we saw in games 1 and 2 was a pretty dynamic White Sox offense that scored 8 and 7 runs against a very good Cleveland pitching staff, Jim.
So when it comes to this mix, I really think it is a matter of like finding how to maximize Gavin Sheets and Jake Berger and Yoan Moncada and Eloy Jimenez, and trying to find out which one's hot, which one's functional, which one can play what position on a given day, and going from there. That makes it very hard. It's like, it's kind of like playing the lottery every single day. Am I finding the hot bat who won't screw up a key play at a key time, give up an extra base that's not, necessary, for a pitcher who sorely needs to strand every runner possible? That's the, what the White Sox roster construction is forcing upon, Pedro Grifol and his coaching staff, is mixing and matching in weird ways because every player is not really suited to play his position for more than a game or 2 at a time. That's what makes it really fascinating. Like Yoan Moncada getting the day off on for the day game made a little bit sense with a lefty on the mound, but also he should be playing every day. But also Jake Berger needs to get in third base. So yeah, it will be a real balancing test for a first-time manager who is also hovering around a dozen games under 500. So all these games count. So normally at this time of the year, like the second month of the season, there'd still be some trial and error, especially if there's, injuries early on. You'd still have some, ways to test something out, see if it works. If it doesn't work, people will forget this game by July. In this case, no, every game, every winnable game right now is more important than it should be because of the hole they dug themselves in April.
Yeah, Gavin Sheets had 2 home runs in this series in the 2 wins. Those were the only hits that he had in the series, as he helped drive in 4 RBIs with those home runs. Jake Berger had a big series for the White Sox. He ended up going 6 for 12 in this series with 2 more home runs. Jake Berger's got 10 home runs this year, Jim. 9 of the 10 home runs have been at home. Jake Berger almost has a 1,300 OPS at Guaranteed Rate Field. He's slugging .911. A .911 OPS at home is amazing. Slugging that is tremendous. And Luis Robert, he had 4 straight games with the home run, as he ended up going 3 for 12 in this series. In Game 1 against the Guardians, the White Sox hit 3 homers. They won. Game 2, they hit 3 homers. They won. Game 3, they did not hit any home runs, and they lost. And I think what this invites into the conversation is that reinforcements could be coming in the power department soon, Jim. Eloy Jimenez is supposedly recovering nicely from having his appendix removed, even though he felt like in his words, felt like he was going to die in Cincinnati. Thankfully, he did not.
So did you.
Yeah. And he could be returning as he's running and he's starting to swing the bat. And it has invited this type of discussion of what happens when Eloy does return to the White Sox. Because if home runs are so important to the success of the Chicago White Sox in 2023, and for them to climb out of this hole that they dug themselves, maybe it makes the most sense to try to have as many power impact bats that they could have in the lineup. But as you alluded to, Jake Burger only plays third base, but Yohan Moncada is taking the day off, and you only got one DH spot. So how do you think Grandal or the White Sox, when Eloy is ready to return, handles this particular situation with the hot hands and trying to get the right guys in the lineup?
I can see their attitude being along the lines of, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, because we've had this conversation before about Burger and Moncada, and then each one gets hurt to where they never overlap. And this is the first time they've actually shared a roster spot while being fully functional. I think this past week, like all season, they really have been ships passing in the night. So that's at third base. Right field, Jimenez getting the appendectomy and being hurt before, that alleviated some pressure. So I think there's always the idea of we can plan for it, but somehow we never actually have to juggle these spots because somebody's always unavailable. But let's say let's indulge this fantasy where everybody's healthy. The most obvious pressure release, I think, would somehow, some way be if either, Moncada or Burger were capable of playing second, which I'm not sure they are. Moncada was a below average second baseman, probably worse now. Now that he's not getting regular reps at it. Burger really doesn't have a second baseman skill set. We joked about how, he was especially atrocious on pop-ups just because of the angles. He didn't understand the communication. The paths were completely unfamiliar to him, and he made a mess of those. And now that now that he's gotten adequate at third base, it feels like he's shifting the goalposts on him to where he can never be a defender you like, because you're always pushing him to play positions that he shouldn't be playing. Just Vaughn in left field and Sheets in right field. And you're always doing this to everybody. So it's got to stop at some point. But I wonder if we're going to see Grandal indulge that. Right now, it's a case where just, with Jimenez out, you can always get guys at bats. When it comes to this scenario where, yes, you have Jimenez, you have Sheets, you have Burger, you have Moncada, you have Grandal, who you like. That's one time where I can see the second base being reopened, especially since the production they're getting out there right now is pretty bad. Hanser Alberto has been fine-ish for the season, but it seemed like he's on the verge of just being the Hanser Alberto everybody knows as a replacement level player. And the early power stretch is going to disappear, going to fade, and you're going to get the guy who bunts with a runner on second and one out against lefty because he just doesn't like swinging the bats if he doesn't have to.
Are you surprised by the following comment that Jake Burger and Gavin Sheets have better slash lines in the season than Andrew Vaughn?
Yes and no. I will say Vaughn is going to play every day. So I think with small samples, you can you can goose the numbers a little bit, especially for, Sheets saying he never faces a tough lefty. Vaughn faces tough pitching from both sides. So I can see the small sample, but I think Burger's the more surprising one. We've seen competency from Sheets and really good at bats. We've seen with Burger, the power, the undeniable power, but we've also seen the really untenable strikeout to walk ratio that you think could, make him a 160 hitter who hits a homer, every 5 games, but does nothing else. So the fact that Burger's made an impact on a more reliable basis, I think is the surprising part. Vaughn's been fine. I think the one other maybe pressure valve the White Sox could have is if Vaughn gets the tired legs again or the back issue or is less than himself, then you can see Berger slide over to first or Sheets slide over to first. You can make that work somehow to get all those bats in there if Vaughn is less than his best. But again, if we're pretending that Vaughn is also healthy along with Moncada and Berger and Sheets and Jimenez, then second base really is the only area where people have theoretically played before and could play again, even if you're really risking weakening the infield defense immensely, because you don't even have the shifts to be able to cover for a second baseman's deficiencies.
I would like this hypothetical to become realistic, like a reality discussion for Pedro Grifol and the White Sox coaching staff, because that would mean, Jim, that this offense is continuing to hit home runs. And those home runs consistently have been coming from Luis Robert, Jake Berger, Gavin Sheets. Andrew Vaughn did hit a home run this series, but he just has 5 home runs so far. And he's on pace to hit 17, 18 home runs again in a season, which is not a whole lot.
Lyle
Overbay. My hope is that they continue to hit home runs. These 4 players. Eloy gets healthy and he's returning to the team. And it forces this coaching staff to make a difficult decision. And it's a difficult decision for all the right reasons. Now you got 4 hitters that, sure, they play roughly the same position, but they're all hitting. And as long as they're hitting, that is a much more enjoyable conversation than, here's 4 bad players. Which of the non-worst ones do you want to play at second base? I have also suggested on Twitter that my hot take is you could just bench Andrew Benintendi and have Eloy Jimenez play in left field. They still want more power in the lineup because Benintendi's OPS is still below 700. I see where people are saying, well, the batting average is 278 and his on-base percentage is 341. He's a contact hitter. He's a below league average hitter is the reality of the situation right now. And he was better this series. We saw a couple of doubles, but man, if he doesn't have a home run by Memorial Day, Jim, I'm going to start sweating. Same thing with Tim Anderson as well, as Tim Anderson did not have a good game 3. But there's a lot of conversation that's going on thanks to Tom Hamilton, who is the Cleveland Guardians play-by-play guy. And from his perspective, I can understand where he thinks that Tim Anderson's not a very good shortstop, especially when he's comparing to what he has seen in Cleveland over the years. And he has seen Tim Anderson since Anderson has joined the White Sox. So I think he's a good judge of character from a Cleveland perspective because, man, Tim Anderson plays his worst baseball against the Cleveland Guardians.
Yeah, and also, he's seen, Lindor. He's seen,
right.
He goes back to like Omar Vizquel and such during his prime. So yeah, he knows shortstop play, or at least he has a high standard probably for regular everyday shortstops in Cleveland.
Yeah, if you're comparing Anderson to prime Francisco Lindor, they're not even in the same galaxy. Lindor was phenomenal. Still one of the best shortstops of the game baseball past age 30 with the New York Mets. This topic here, I went on a rant about how the White Sox, I thought, were mishandling Yasmani Grandal, and they should put him on the 10-day IL. And then Grandal goes 6 for 11 in this series. And I could hear from 35th and Shields being like, ha! Proved you wrong. This is why we waited it out. And we did not send Yasmani Grandal to the injured list, Josh. You were wrong on this because look at the great week he had against the Guardians going 6 for 11. Being in person for the first 2 games, he hit singles. He should have hit a couple of doubles because they rolled to the wall. He can't run, Jim. Yasmani Grandal cannot run. He can't sprint right now. So you have the slowest player in Major League Baseball hitting singles, which is great. 6 for 11 is awesome, but he can't run. What are we doing here?
And can't run more than he normally can't run. Like,
right.
Normally say Yasmani can't run. Now we're saying he can't run. Like, he's physically unable to when he tries to, like when he exceeds his maximum exertion level. That's when he signals to the dugout for a pinch runner because something happened. It is uncomfortable, like watching him, especially on balls that, one hop the wall or something like that in right field. And you can see him rounding first. You can see, you can see like his body language, like his upper half is saying double, double, double. His lower half is saying, ah! his eyes are saying like, oh my God, like, how do I negotiate, between, what I know that should happen versus what I know I can do. And like the last thing I want to do as Yasmani Grandal is end up in a crumpled heap 45 feet between first and second and, need assistance getting off the field. So it is really, really awkward right now because that's what's so frustrating is that like bat to ball, he's fine. Catching, he's fine. Like he's going through all the, tasks of his job that don't involve sprinting as well as he could possibly expect, especially given where he came from last year. As a rebound season, like he's doing fine. It's just the one thing he can't do. And like most of the time he doesn't need to do it. But in the, specific instances where like he, has to pull up from, at first base because he can't get to second and double, that's, normally that kind of judgment or, the restraint he's using to keep himself healthy, like, okay, that's fine. But now you have 270 other feet in front of you. And like, Berger helped him trot home a couple times. Like that was nice that he hit a single, then Berger hit a homer immediately after to not have to worry about that. But, when Berger doesn't do that, you have a case where just like, okay, is a triple going to score him from first? Is that what we're looking at here? Is like, you just have to, something needs to happen behind him to replace the runner at the base he previously occupied in order for him to score. Yeah, like a single scores him from third, a double scores him from second. Like that's what we're looking at here, because like I even think like Albert Pujols is probably the slowest player I can remember, and like Yasmani Grandal with hamstrings that could explode on him is definitely the most painful running experience I think I've ever witnessed. Just because you can see the agony. Not only like physically, but also like mentally of like, I really want to get to second because with that hit, I deserve to get to second, but nothing from my shoulders down says I can get to second.
Yeah. He should have 11 doubles on the season. He should have had 2 doubles in this series if he had normal working hamstrings, but he doesn't. And my concern, especially this upcoming weekend series against Kansas City, let's say he gets a single and he stays hot. Jake Berger hits a gapper in the left center field. Can Grandal get to third? Or is he going to force Jake Berger to have a lawn single because Grandal can't round second base? Like, again, it's great that he was 6'11", but he can't run. I don't know how else to put it, Jim. Like, this poor guy can't run right now. And Seby Zavala is not hitting, and you've already optioned, Carlos Perez down to Charlotte. So you're just rolling with 2 catchers right now. And Grandal actually DH'd in game 3 with Seby Zavala catching Dylan Cease against the Guardians. So, I mean, this is again, going back to the previous conversation, a little bit awkward with this White Sox coaching staff being forced to make some difficult decisions. Here's another one. Like, how much longer do you go having Yasmani Grandal play in this form? Because the more that he does run and the more that he does hit singles, which is a positive thing, the more risk that he does pull a hamstring, and then he is for sure going on the injured list.
Yeah, he's like an old car where like somebody has, figured out like, well, if I cut off half a pop bottle and put it next to the radiator, that'll stop the fluids from leaking, and I can just reuse the radiator fluid and put it back in. We'll be okay. And, it works okay until like, car hits a bump, the pop bottle gets loose, and all of a sudden, just everything's overheating and steam's emitting from the hood, and you're stuck on the side of the highway without a service exit anywhere nearby. That's kind of what we're looking at here with Grandal, but it's such a high leverage part of the season. Like I keep coming back to like being a dozen games under 500, like everything feels so necessary. And if Grandal is hitting and Seby Zavala is absolutely not hitting, like Zavala isn't like even like a 250 OBP. Like if you're doing like, what do you expect from Seby Zavala? Like in OBP, it starts with like 2.5 or 2.6 and the occasional homer and a 150 ISO and good defense. Like you can say like, yeah, we'll roll with that every day. But when his OBP starts with a 1, and you saw like in the second inning on earlier today, where, they run out of hitters after 6 guys, and now it's Hanser Alberto, it's Seby Zavala and Jake Marisnick, and Alberto doesn't get the job done. And now Zavala's up and he strikes out. It's like, that's kind of what we're looking at here with just, how abruptly this lineup ends, especially when it turns over to a top of the order, as we mentioned with Tim Anderson, who's up and down based on how his own legs are doing. So that's why it feels like I understand where the White Sox are coming from, in the sense that Grandal, like, given the way he's hitting and given the way he's like functionally catching very well for expectations for a 34-year-old catcher, like, you want to play him every day. It's just, man, it's there. If you feel like if you put him on the 10-day IL and the White Sox go 2-8 over those 10 days and Zavala does nothing and you really could have used Grandal, I think that's what they're really fearing here. And that's what this hole has created for them, is just the idea that, like, if they lose or if they put a player out of reach for a time, and then, like, after they put them on the shelf, like, they could really use them the next 3 days. That's, I think, what they're terrified of. And it's terrible that it's come to this. And it's terrible that it's come to this so early. Like, usually these are the kind of discussions we're having in August. Like, the dog days, stretch run,
sure.
Can they manage it? But it's in May. Normally this is the time where you can play the long game, but the long game, is a lot shorter now because of just how poorly they started the season.
And for those that are watching in the live stream on youtube.com/SoxMachine or on SoxMachine.com, this will be a shorter version of Sox Machine Live, as we'll hand it off to our friends from the 108 at 8 p.m. Central Time. So you'll be able to check out that show starting at 8 o'clock in just a few minutes on youtube.com/from-the-108. So let's quickly talk about the Kansas City Royals series. The White Sox and Royals played just last week, with the Royals winning 3 out of 4 at Kauffman Stadium against the Chicago White Sox. We were very aggravated after that particular series, because it's not a great thing, especially for a team that's supposed to be contending in 2023, to lose 3 out of 4 on the road at Kansas City. So the White Sox have another opportunity here to try to gain some games or pick up some of those losses that they had last week. And for the White Sox, starting pitching probable starting on Friday at 7:10 p.m. Central Time. Michael Kopech will get the start, as Pedro Grifol shuffled up the pitching rotation. Saturday at 1:10 p.m. Central Time. Note the time difference here. Friday 7:10, Saturday 1:10. Lucas Giolito will get the ball. And then on Sunday at 1:10 p.m. Central Time, it will be Lance Lynn. And speaking of Lance Lynn, Jim, that is one thing coming out of this Cleveland series for the Chicago White Sox, is that the White Sox pitching did perform very well. They only allowed 8 runs in the series. Now, I think a lot of that is 2 reasons. One, the White Sox pitchers themselves did pitch better. Second, man, Cleveland's offense is as bad as they look on paper. That is not a good offense, especially when they do not have Jose Ramirez, who is out for this series due to the death of his grandmother back at his home in the Dominican Republic. But Lance Lynn needed a bounce-back start, and he got one against Cleveland. Do you think he can get a second one on Sunday against the Royals?
It was nice to see, like, the White Sox rotation pitch as though, like, this is kind of like a AAA lineup, or I'm going to throw strikes and see how far they can hit it. And they really couldn't hit it that far. The White Sox holding that home run edge even through 3 games. Cause we talked about, like, the White Sox nearly had twice as many homers as the Guardians, as poorly as the White Sox have hit, like, even they're running laps around the Guardians power wise. And, that manifested itself in this series as well. Also, Josh Naylor being out with leg tightness halfway into the first game, like, that also really, widened the chasm between the 2 teams in terms of power. But with Lynn, like, I'm hoping that it's not a matter of just like, well, I'm throwing strikes to this lineup of largely chumps, or at least largely like all samey type players who are contact, but don't really, have to string together hits in order to do damage. Like the Royals do have some guys who can hit the ball out of the yard, as we saw, especially, Vinny Pasquantino, chief among them. I'm curious how much mindset of just, facing this lineup, affected the way the pitchers operated, because we saw with Clevenger too, just like he pitched pretty fearlessly. I think 2 of his last 4 walks came in the last inning, and Grifol kind of pushed everybody into the last inning of work, when maybe he should have gone to the bullpen earlier under normal circumstances. But something to watch for in terms of his management going in this Kansas City series. But the one thing about Lynn is he said he had different fastball movements, and it looked like from the pitch data that his fastball wasn't had the right ride, like had some horizontal movement, but in the right direction versus the cut that took away some of the, just some of the carry that his fastball usually has. So given, how he throws largely fastball and the breaking pitches are more for show, it does stand to reason that like minor fastball tweaks might affect him more than, affects the normal, standard pitcher because of just how much he relies on it. But I also think that he needs to show it against a lineup that has shown that it can punish him pretty quickly. And we also didn't really get to test whether, Lynn has stretch issues because they didn't really put base runners on him,
right?
Except for until there were 2 outs. So I want to still see that. But there were some some factors underneath the performance when it came to just pitch movement that suggests that maybe he got on top of some issues that were exacerbating some of the problems he had, stranding runners and limiting to 1 hit at a time versus 3 or 4 in a row. So here's hoping. And if he does happen to show this different pitch movement, this different, better standard pitch movement that he had against the Guardians, that should alleviate some of the concerns you have against like facing a pitcher twice in 2 weeks, because the pitches they saw the first time around shouldn't be the same pitches they see this time around with his fastball actually moving the way he wants it to.
And a look at the American League Central standings on May 18, 2023. Again, the Minnesota Twins still lead with a 24-20 record. Cleveland losing 2 out of 3 against the White Sox, dropped to 20-23. They're in second place, picking up the a spot against Detroit in the winning percentage as the Tigers are 19-22 on the season. The White Sox are at 16-29. They're 8.5 games back of the Minnesota Twins, 5 games back at Cleveland and Detroit for second place. And there is Kansas City at 14-31, still in last place, 2 games behind the Chicago White Sox, as the Royals are going to be, they won the last 2 games. As a matter of fact, they won a series in San Diego, of all places. So the Royals have been playing some good baseball as of late. So it should be a pretty interesting series. But I think what's going to really gauge or garner a lot of attention, depending on how his bullpen session goes, is Liam Hendriks. According to Jeff Passett of ESPN, Hendriks has arrived to Chicago, and we did see video footage of Hendriks in the bullpen or having a bullpen session next to Lucas Giolito during the NBC Sports Chicago broadcast of the game against the Cleveland Guardians on Thursday. And depending on how that bullpen session goes, the White Sox will make a decision on when Liam Hendriks will be returning. Jim, is it possible that Liam Hendriks returns to the White Sox this weekend and help out against the Kansas City Royals?
I suppose it's possible, but when you look at the, speaking pitch data, when you look at his radar gun readings, they're like 93, 94. And normally he's like 97 and 99. So I'm less optimistic about him than I was like, Garrett Crochet. I think like Crochet, like he's throwing well in terms of power. I think it's more a matter of just Tommy John affects command as well, and just, the ability to sustain command, especially pitching on back-to-back days. Like, it's going to take him a while to knock off all the rust and everything. He could have some ugly moments, but the power is there with, Hendriks. I think the power is still a ways away, and it still feels like a little bit too soon. And I don't like thinking that, just because, like, it's a great story. Like, it's awesome that he's, throwing 94 after what he went through. Like,
right.
That's what, it feels like, given his standards as an all-star closer and one of the best relief pitchers in all of baseball, that 94 feels like a mid-leverage guy at best, if he's missing 3 ticks. But I don't really, it's a weird thing to juggle between, like, he wants to be held to his normal standards, but also when you just step back and look at everything he's been through and just the, undergoing chemotherapy for lymphoma, like, you don't want to get, this is a case where it does transcend performance a little bit, and it's up to the White Sox to have some adults in the room to say, like, this isn't good for the team, and we know what you want to do, but here's what you currently can do. We'll monitor it. We'll update every week or so to see where you are stuff wise, but hopefully he's introduced like in low leverage type situations early, and not like throwing like Alex Colomé into a tie game in the 8th inning.
He will. You know,
but
you know, Grifol will
put
him in high leverage.
Yeah, I just, if you were throwing 97, or 96, 97, I'd say, sure. The fastball is probably still the fastball. It's just more a matter of command. But when he's throwing 94, that just makes me feel like, ugh. I don't want to be disappointed in him. That's the thing is I don't want this to be another thing like that the 2023 White Sox ruined.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mentioned that on GN Sports, on WGN, that my biggest concern is that Liam Hendriks comes out to huge fanfare, because he will, and he gets blitzed because he's throwing 93, 94. And he's not the Liam Hendriks that we saw last year. Again, everything that Liam Hendriks has gone through, stage 4 cancer, chemotherapy, the fact that he could pick up a baseball right now and throw it at least 93 miles per hour and get hitters out in AAA is amazing. But let's see how this bullpen session goes, and hopefully this isn't one of those situations that the White Sox are mishandling an injury or rehab situation to get a player back that can be critical to them and try to help them get out of this hole that they have dug themselves. But at the same time, we're all hopeful that Liam is back to 100%. And it may be a case that he's just not being challenged in AAA, Jim, and he's not going to get that challenge until he's pitching on a major league mound.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of is being challenged, but also Charlotte warps things as well. That's just a tough, that's a warped environment to pitch in, especially for small samples. So it could be a case where they don't like him necessarily in Chicago, but they don't like him in Charlotte. Birmingham's not going to teach him anything. So they might be stuck a little bit and might have to do some hard last mile stuff in Chicago. But that's why I said hopefully lower leverage type stuff. But when they take a washed up Alex Colomé and put him in the 8th inning of a tie game, that's what scares me a little bit about the judgment and just kind of name brand. Maybe with the bullpen pitching a little bit better as a whole, especially Joe Kelly looking like the Joe Kelly the White Sox envision, that maybe they won't feel the pressure to have Hendriks be Liam Hendriks right away. But they've had to make some weird decisions, and because of they've dug themselves, they will probably feel under the gun to try to force some things that maybe shouldn't be forced.
Want to shout out to Celeste Pappy, who gave us a super chat. Thank you so much for doing that on YouTube.
Thank you.
He wrote to us. Appreciate you, fellas. Thanks for all the dedicated work, despite how frustrating these White Sox are. I really appreciate it. And for those that are watching the live stream, we're going to bump it over to our friends from the 108 as they'll get started here with their show. You could watch at youtube.com/from the 108. But for us here on Sox Machine Live, that will do it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. If you just discovered us, you could follow us on Twitter. We're at Sox Machine. You can follow me on Twitter at SoxMachine_Josh. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SoxMachine. And if you don't get a chance to watch the live streams, we also upload the audio versions of each episode into our podcast feed, which you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoy our work and want more, you can get more by becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/SoxMachine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content, ad-free versions of both the podcast and website, and our new Sox Machine swag in the Sox Machine store. Monthly plans start at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine podcast is part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network, and your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball on SoxMachine.com. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for watching and listening.
Gotta walk the dogs, school drop-off, meetings from 10 to 3, take kids to soccer practice, then there goes the extra time for a jog. That's okay. Maybe next week.
When everyone else relies on you, it's easy to put your needs last. Therapy is a dedicated time to focus on what you need to be happy, so you can show up for yourself the way you do for others. BetterHelp offers convenient online therapy on your schedule. It's the same professional service you'd get from an in-person therapist, but with the option to communicate when and how you want, by chat, phone, or video call. Go to their site and fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com.